Namaste to all seekers, disciples, devotees, to Evenings with Sraddhalu. Namaste, Sraddhalu.
Namaste, Narad. Welcome to everyone.
The subject tonight is very, very important. It's National Yoga, and you will explain that to all of us. Thank you.
Yes. In the last discussion that we had on current affairs, I had shared with you the global perspective of the shift that was necessary in the entire global economic framework to prevent future wars. The existing framework depended for its survival on incessant, unending wars. It depended on an enslavement of certain countries by others. Some who were in elite could print money, others had to consume the money and produce goods to be exported to this one country, the United States in this case. Even today, we keep seeing warnings on the economy. For India, for example, very senior economists made a statement that unless India can make an agreement with the US for free trade, we will have huge unemployment because the people involved in production for exports will be jobless. This whole thinking of export-based production as an economic engine is fundamentally flawed. The planet Earth as a whole does not export out of planet Earth. India is big enough, China is big enough, US is big enough not to need to export to others to survive. Europe as a whole is big enough. But to bring back that equitability where these at least larger units can be internally self-sufficient and equivalent and not one enslaved to the other, not one printing paper and another consuming or producing goods to be consumed by the one printing paper. And all this, the shift from this to a new stable, viable economy is what we are seeing today. It is difficult, it is complex, it is painful. It creates uncertainties because we had a stable order which demanded wars to sustain. Now that order is being rebalanced. Instability, uncertainty are a part of the game, but we have to change the thinking process itself. And so we saw this last time. And as I pointed out, and I repeat again, you don't have to like Trump. You don't have to ignore his flaws. I'm sure he's a very flawed person on certain levels or others. It's not our concern. We are looking rather at the policies and how they are intended to change the global balance and the larger picture of the evolution of humanity. So this was the broad background from last time. I will like to take up 3 questions and 2 comments that people have shared, which will lead us to the theme for today. And the theme is National Yoga. It's a phrase Sri Aurobindo uses. We will come to that as a consequence of these. So let me take Sparsh's question. He says, you put both Elon Musk and Trump on the side of disruptors, but after their split, Musk tweeted that Trump is in the Epstein files and then subsequently deleted it. He is now engaged with some of the most rabid Islamists of Syria, etc. Don't you think for this term, Trump has kissed the ring? So for those who might not be familiar, kiss the ring is generally the symbol is used for somebody bowing to a position of power where they kiss the ring of the Pope or other religious head as a sign of submission. And so this is the argument because Trump is engaging with the rabid Islamists of Syria. Remember one thing, do not trust the media. So we come back to what are those individuals, leaders, whether in Syria or in the Afghanistan, Taliban, what do they actually represent? And the media gives you a very wrong picture. Second, what is Trump doing? Engaging with them, again, what the media gives you as a picture is very wrong. So engagement has to be understood in terms of for what and to what direction. And I had mentioned this last time, how Trump was also weaning Pakistan away from China, helping it to attain internal economic stability of some kind so that it does not implode and become a rogue nation. So there are things like this which are happening. I recall about 2 years back when Modi had engaged with diplomacy with the Taliban leadership. There were many who said, how can you engage with these rabid extremists, etc.? In turn, over time, as you can see, that engagement has been beneficial for India. Certainly, it has been beneficial for those Taliban groups. And Pakistan is on the receiving end of that shift. Because the Taliban could align with India, they became independent of their dependence on Pakistan, and that has changed the whole equation. The problem, of course, with this narrative also, when I use the word Taliban, it's a one umbrella term. In fact, there are several Taliban groups. Some of them are more hardline extremist, some are less hardline extremist. Some are vocally against India, some are for India. If you go back to the history of Afghanistan, it used to be one of the outskirts of India, highly influenced by Indian values, Indian traditions. It was a domain where Hinduism and Buddhism flourished for millennia until it was the Islamic invasions which wiped it out. So there is a history going back. There are deep karmic entanglements also that India has. So there's a shift. I'm not saying necessarily that it is entirely right or that it was not without risks. Certainly it was without risks, and no great decision can be taken without some risk involved. So, but still the outcome in the long run has been quite different from what the media tried to at that time push. And it's the same way I would suggest, without going to specifics about which leaders in Syria or others, that there is an engagement happening where an attempt is made to turn genuine people away from dependencies on the cabal, global cabal, and bring them in line with a different framework of working. And Trump is very much involved with that. And so that explained Musk's tweet about Epstein files and his deleting it was a strategy. It's something I had mentioned in passing, but again, I will highlight. When Musk joined Trump's government and became the head of Doge and started cleaning the government waste, there was a point where there was a mass level coordinated attack on his companies and on his cars. The problem was on the streets, people began to attack Elon Musk's Tesla cars. And so people were afraid of buying them, began to sell them. That was a very dangerous transition for Elon Musk. He completed his work in Doge, left, and then they went through this so-called public spat, which now has placed Elon Musk as not seen obviously along with Trump. Those attacks stopped. So it was more a strategic move between them. You can see again recently, both have started appreciating each other, praising each other and all that. So you must understand these are very complex behind the scenes plays for larger goals and not be carried away by such appearances. Musk had to make statements criticizing Trump, but not criticizing the core agenda, criticizing him for being insufficient to the core agenda and so on. So these are things which the media laps up. Anytime someone criticizes Trump, the media will highlight. So these people know how to play that game. Look at the next question, which is from Luke. He asks about the global disruption, the fact that there are two key tools, warmongering and the oil market. So his question also is that since oil is not a scarce resource and can be produced through bacterial processes, his question is, I just wonder how this dollar-based US control on other companies, on other countries, has been able to keep on going thanks to the oil issue, while any country could rely on discrete local oil production and thus get free of this control device. Can you explain your understanding of this matter? So it's not so easy. The moment you attempt to bring in some new form of energy, there are powerful interests which do intervene. Sometimes they will even topple governments which do not comply with certain structures of control. And there have been also assassinations where they could not be eliminated. So we are in a very difficult space where everybody has to compromise if they have to survive in the seat of power. Even Modi had to draw lines when it came to certain decisions because openly they threatened that they would either collapse the rupee or create other kinds of international crisis, and he had to backtrack on certain points. The same thing internally also. There are internal threats of terrorists where certain positions have to be taken. You see how easily the Bangladesh prime minister was overthrown because the military had promised her to protect her and then backed out at the last minute and ordered her to leave, otherwise they would ensure she would be killed. there are things which happen behind the scenes we do not fully appreciate in these kinds of complex global deals. So, especially with regard to oil production, this is one of those areas where the control of the cabal is dependent on energy control, which is one of the reasons why the free energy or any kind of free energy access is suppressed. So, it goes very much in that domain where countries could become independent. Second, the specific knowledge of the bacteria and the bacteria culture, etc., is largely controlled. You cannot just simply say some bacteria will happen. You have to find them, you have to culture them. So if you see the technology of oil drilling, you'll see at the point of drilling, they pump in huge quantities of some other fluid to force the oil out. That other fluid draws upon some vegetal materials which are mixed in certain oils and things like that, which are the base for fermentation of the bacteria over the next 20 or 30 years. So the actual mix is supposed to be a trade secret. And they say it is actually for lubrication of the drilling, which is not true. So just to tell you that it's not so simple, that there are other complex issues. Prasad has sent two quotations from the mother, and I will read from them. They're both very important quotations, and then his question. So he quotes from Mother's agenda two messages. The first is 1956, March 21. The mother writes, "The age of capitalism and business is drawing to a close, but the age of communism too will pass. For communism as it is preached is not constructive. It is a weapon to combat plutocracy. But when the battle is over and the armies are disbanded for want of employment, then communism, having no more utility, will be transformed into something else that will express a higher truth. We know this truth and we are working for it so that it may reign upon earth." This is an extraordinary, powerful, profound statement whose full import we will appreciate only 20 or 30 years from now, when certain things would have shifted radically. At the moment, we're in the midst of the shift, and the uncertainties create too many doubts. But I want to just point to a few indications, perhaps, which could help us appreciate what she's saying. So, capitalism and business, the age is drawing to a close. We can understand that because capitalism, as it was practiced so far, was largely a willing enslavement of the many to a few for money. So as long as you're being paid, you're willing to do whatever is required that the payer is asking of you. So it was a kind of a voluntary slave market and hierarchy where you gave up practically the freedom that you had willingly. So freely you give up freedom and you accept inequality. It served a purpose. It was a very powerful driver for the human ego, desire, and ambition to be channeled into creative construction. So it's powerful, it's important, and necessary at a certain phase. Communism, as it was, as she says, it is preached, is not constructive. It is a weapon to combat plutocracy. So to that extent, it was justified as a mechanism to combat plutocracy, but it's not constructive. In fact, it leads to some kind of an inertia. It promotes inertia because nobody's responsible anymore. You're all equal. So in practice, though, it leads to a hierarchy of authority in that supposed equality. Some are more equal, some are less equal. And it ends up with an enslavement of the mass in a rigid, narrow structure, largely held by inertia. So you saw in the Soviet Union, for example, the complete breakdown of creativity, innovation, and production, and the economic collapse effectively because, well, nobody's responsible. Well, that's what you see in big governments, the same structure. Or socialism being another variant of the whole story. But where the government drove people with interest and enthusiasm, you had a rapid and very quick creativity, innovation, and leadership, even within the Soviet Union. So you had to trigger, you had to activate the human interest and the sense of human freedom and allow its innate nature to find its way. So communism as it is preached is not constructive. But then she says, when the battle is over and the armies are disbanded for want of employment, then communism having no more utility will be transformed into something else. This is very suggestive. What is this battle and what is this want of employment and the army is being disbanded? We're in fact in that passage right now. We're bang in the middle of this passage. And so you're seeing things which don't seem to make sense. At the same time, it's also the last recrudescence of the same tendency. I'm going to point to the example of Mamdani being elected as New York mayor. And on the promise of what? He said he will make the buses free. He will make certain basic foods and other access completely free. And at least for those who are on the poorer side, that's a very attractive proposition. For the wealthy, he promised certain things. He promised, for example, that they would not be taxed already more than what they are, which was, of course, a strategic lie. And immediately after he won, he announced that he will tax the rich. So I'm going to give you an example of how the media spun it a little later. Maybe this is a good time to, but I'm going to digress from this text for this purpose. Just remember, we're going to come back to the text. So there's a New York Times, I've put the link, New York Times article after Zohran Mamdani was elected. And the title, very interestingly, says something quite fascinating. It says that Mamdani has been emboldened. An emboldened Mamdani now comes forward with his sheds conciliatory tone. So he had a conciliatory tone to begin with. Now he's emboldened. So you see how the media spins very carefully. A newly empowered Zohran Mamdani on Wednesday vowed to use his convincing victory in the New York City mayor's race as a mandate to push an ambitious progressive agenda past potential obstacles, from billionaire antagonists to Albany bureaucracy. So he's fighting bureaucracy, he's fighting billionaires, and these are the obstacles potentially in front of him. And he has an ambitious progressive agenda. You see, all the keywords have been set to create a context. And then the facts are now arranged and often twisted to fit within the context as if, oh, here's a warrior, he's a fighter against all the billionaires and the bureaucracy. Anybody who's not a billionaire will say, oh, what a wonderful thing. The billionaire will say, yeah, nobody can fight us, it doesn't matter. But you see the way the media has already set your mind. And then in a shift from the mollifying tone he had used for months, Mamdani made clear that while he would govern for all New Yorkers, he was determined to deliver for those who had been agitating for structural change. So shift from mollifying tone. That means his tone earlier was mollifying. It was fake. He lied. And now he's telling you the truth. That's really what the media is telling to you in a very indirect way. And he will govern for all, yes, but he will deliver to those who have been agitating, not for those who have not agitated. You see, there's a very subtle shift. I'm skipping portions where I'm going to the heart of the matter, where he says, I'll deliver on the agenda, all those nice things. The shift in tone was most striking when it came to his plan to raise taxes on the wealthy. Here's the game, for which the entire article is a cover-up. In recent weeks, Mamdani had conveyed an openness to finding creative ways to pay for his signature policy initiative, universal childcare, indicating that he was not necessarily set on raising taxes. There was plenty of revenue in the existing budget, he suggested. So till now he said, I'm going to give you all the freebies, and there's enough budget, don't worry, I won't tax the rich. Now they're saying he needs to raise the money for doing all this. He doesn't have the money. You see the clear shift. He was lying. Now he's facing reality. But the media won't say it like that. You see how they've spun the whole idea. Next, you see the further spin. On Wednesday, Mamdani said his call to tax the wealthy was also about fairness. So you see now the spin again. He said New Yorkers had voted for him, were eager for billionaires to pay more taxes. Oh, so all the voters said, oh, we want the billionaires to pay more taxes. But he promised he would not, right? So the day before the election, droves of Mamdani supporters marched chanting, tax the rich. My supporters and our movement are hungry for politics of consistency, a politics that actually focuses on the needs of working people. You see, all these are platitudes. Wordplay. For what? I think that our tax system is an example of the many ways in which working people have been betrayed. So now basically what the entire article is saying, that he promised he would not tax the rich. He promised he had all the money. Now he's facing the reality and he's going to extract money by taxing the rich, and how the cover up takes place. But as a reader, if you just read the words and don't stop to question and think, you'd get swayed by the word game, word salad. And you'd think, oh yeah, you get an image, an impression. Here's a man fighting for the poor against the rich and who are going to oppose him from doing good to the poor. No, it's not at all that. The truth is completely a reverse. So why is this important? Because the communism or socialism that he was promoting, and he's blatantly promoting that, is not sustainable. It is going to collapse the economy of New York, as Trump has already pointed out many times. But there comes a point where this is a last-ditch effort. New Yorkers have not faced this communism. There are very interesting articles which have come out from Chinese and ex-Soviet who escaped the communism of the Soviets and China, came to the US, who are shocked. He said, this is what we escaped, and now we're going to face this here in the US. They have understood because they went through that struggle. The New Yorkers, at least voting for Mamdani, have not understood. They have never suffered what communism actually does. So here they will have to go through this suffering in order to realize that it does not work. I'm highlighting this because all this will come back to our theme, National Yoga, where Sri Aurobindo explains there is a recrudescence of things which need to be eliminated. But for that, you have to pass through those things to realize that they're not useful, not suitable to be thrown out. And this you're seeing now. And it's actually fascinating to ask, why would communism suddenly come up in the middle of the elites of the capitalists? And here you get the answer in Mother's observation. When the battle is over, and it's not yet over, we are on the edge, it's swinging around, and the armies are disbanded for want of employment. Now nobody is interested anymore in playing this game. And so what happens to the people who were fighting for communism, for capitalism, for socialism, whatever the game is, all the isms? And then communism, having no more utility, will be transformed into something else that will express a higher truth. What is that? And that's when the National Yoga will rise to a station where the reality of a higher basis, a higher principle will operate. And we will read something from Sri Aurobindo shortly. What Mother is saying is, we know this truth and we are working for it so that it may reign upon earth. So here's a position taken already by the higher forces, preparing a foundation for this from top down, waiting for a certain or working for a certain acceleration of this passage of passing through various experiments to come to a readiness where humanity can meet this descending truth. That meeting point is not yet, but it is very close and imminent, because we are completing this last stages of the National Yoga, in this case in the United States, the same struggle, where what was not attempted, which still holds fascination for the human mind, is being given a chance to be hopefully within 2 or 3 years proved to be a failure and to be able to move on from that. You see the same game happening within India in a different way in the Bihar elections, where the basis of the whole electoral framework was caste community identities. And to me, it is a sad thing to see that Modi took a position that he will not fight against reservation and will still promote and accept reservation. If he fights for that, he will lose that battle. So he has to accept that, win the elections, and then make changes through which people finally will say, all right, we don't want reservation. Slower way. It's slower way, less unstable, but hopefully it works in time. I don't know. We will see. So this was first quotation which was shared by Prasad. And the second quotation also is very interesting. This is 1969, November 22, that the mother writes or speaks in the agenda. I think it's a message she gave. The men of finance and the businessmen have been offered the possibility to collaborate with the future. but most of them refuse, convinced that money is stronger than the future. Thus, the future will crush them with its irresistible power. Wow. Again, a very powerful punch, but very significant. Today, you can understand how. It's a media article which I just saw this morning, I think, where somebody was pointing out that India is going to face massive unemployment in the next 3 years because everybody is replacing human beings with AI and automation. The moment you do that, you don't have enough jobs for people. What happens then? So, are you going to head for some kind of an economic collapse? Are you going to artificially create jobs by suppressing automation and artificial intelligence? You can't do that either. What's the in-between transition? What is the mechanism and where is it heading for? So perhaps I can hint at what it is heading towards. Elon Musk has already spoken about it quite openly. And I had spoken about this in an article, which in a discussion, which about a year back, which was titled Future Hopes, where I give a perspective of what the future of humankind would be like with robotics and with free energy in that combination. So one of the things which can happen as a result, just you see at your houses today across the world now, generally speaking, you have a lot of machinery automating many things, including, for those who can afford it, dishwashers and washing machines, etc. What it has done is free you from certain tedious chores so that you can dedicate time for other things. But assume now, take it a little further with AI and robotics, you can replace the human being even from having to put the clothes for drying or to fold them afterwards and arrange them, etc. So let's say you have a housekeeper at home who is a robot, who can do all this, all these tasks. And day and night, a robot doesn't need to rest, doesn't need to eat. So yes, you'll have the headache of maintaining the robot. You will have a headache with inefficiencies or weaknesses in its AI, which will of course continue to improve eventually. It will be expensive to begin with, but eventually it might drop low enough. To what end? If you get more free time, next question is, well, what do you do? Where do you get your money? You have a job. So this job-based thinking, again, is a huge error. It is a remnant of the old capitalist structure, where you are programmed in your education from childhood. You are being trained in your school to be ready for a job. You come out of school with your paper looking for a job. No, you become entrepreneur. You start your own job. You sustain yourself. Now, of course, not everybody can become that because we have different capabilities. So, but when you become entrepreneur, there are people near you to whom you will give jobs. So it's not as if you have to go to a multinational entity. You have many sources of potential jobs and entrepreneurship. But even that is reaching a point where in the entrepreneurship, what more can you do beyond a point? And there comes a stage where it does not matter where you are because you're connected through the internet. You do not need to pay money for others to look after you for you to be comfortable because that's taken care of by the robot. You're effectively free to do whatever you want. So how would you get the resources? Well, that's when it becomes a little complicated. And Elon Musk actually suggests some kind of universal income in which you get a minimum stipend, which allows you to then take whatever things are required selectively. But largely, you are autonomous and independent if you grow your own food at least. And so even that may be shared between people in local communities. But still, the point is, you are largely autonomous and not dependent on the capitalistic hierarchical system. You have the benefits of a communist framework, but without its suffocation. And the money is only nominally uh, uh, involved. Now, if you think about this deeply enough, you'll suddenly say, yes, this reminds me of something. It reminds you of Orwell and what Mother described as the framework for Orwell. So even there, she said, eventually no money exchanged. It's all based on internal barter. But in transition, you can have some amount of money exchange. But more and more, it would move towards this kind of a community framework where all would be looked after each other. But it should not degrade to the communist socialist framework of the past. That is the error which tends to happen in any such attempt unless people make the effort to grow in consciousness. So two things are needed: the growth in consciousness and then the particular factor of resources in which allow for equitable distribution and mutual support. That is again on the brink. So this is the background I'm placing for understanding more deeply what the mother has spoken of when she says the future will crush them with its irresistible power. The appearance of AI is one of those very powerful crushing events, which is going to suddenly, in the next 2-3 years, unbalance all the existing orders, hierarchies, and structures of the capitalist framework. So, age of capitalism and business is drawing to a close, and then age of communism too will pass. Drawing to a close when Mother said it, 1956, we are seeing the results for sure now. And the communism also, we will hopefully see it sooner rather than later. These two are going to follow. What has happened in practice, and of which she has already foreseen, the communism of China is finished. Communism of Soviet Union is finished. Those are gone. What remains are scattered communisms, as you see in Kerala, or attempts for it to survive in Bengal, West Bengal, or a few other little islands. But as such, it does not have much of a hold already. But capitalism also is heading the same direction with this inevitable, unavoidable change. So I come to Prasad's question, which is just after. Prasad writes, we keep talking about how far behind China India is. The question is, does India need to emulate China? Or is there a new path that India needs to find? Maybe we need to study the works of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother more deeply and sincerely to find this new path. Yes, it's a valid point. I did not suggest at any point in the discussion of comparing India and China that India should follow the same path. I showed there were differences of approach even in the value systems and priorities. So obviously they would take a different path. But the growth path in India is still not sufficiently organized, collectively organized, or not brought into collective mutual support. You see what's happening in China because of central control and an elite which is sufficiently wise and well-intentioned for the future of China. They're strongly patriotic. They've ensured that their internal company structures for the national interest are so made that they are resilient and very easily adaptive. India does not have that kind of internal coordination. So we're still fighting in the illusion that was imposed on India of the so-called free market, where it's a fight for all and the best will survive, others will be eliminated. It doesn't work like that. It's a very painful, slow, chaotic process. But we have been taught to celebrate that. When the market collapses, we say, that's the nature of free market. No, that's your programming. It's not the best way. So there is a best way path. We will read a passage from Sri Aurobindo shortly where he describes this. So I'm coming now to two passages from Sri Aurobindo where he uses this phrase, national yoga. The first one is 1911. This is 114 years ago, July 13th. Sri Aurobindo writes to some devotee, be very careful to follow my instructions in avoiding the old kind of politics. Remember, this Sri Aurobindo has just come out from jail. He has put in place the entire freedom struggle, and it is now certain that it is going to succeed in some form or other. And he has been commanded to go to Pondicherry for his intense sadhana. So he's writing from here in Pondicherry. Be very careful to follow my instructions in avoiding the old kind of politics. So this is obviously someone who is still in the politics. Then Sri Aurobindo says, spirituality is India's only politics. The fulfillment of the Sanatana Dharma, the eternal truth. It's only Swaraj, self-rule. I have no doubt that we shall have to go through our parliamentary period in order to get rid of the notion of Western democracy by seeing in practice how helpless it is to make nations blessed. India is passing really through the first stages of a sort of national yoga. So I'm going to pause with a few comments and continue the text. So first he said the fulfillment of the eternal truth, Sanatana Dharma, is the only independence, Swaraj, self-rule. So this sets you a very high standard. The problem of such a high standard is, what does it mean in practice to fulfill Sanatan Dharma? And remember, spirituality is India's only politics. So what are we going to do? How do we manage the politics and the governance structures, which politics is all about, essentially? And it's not obvious, the connection. He will give you a few indications, but the indications are mostly what you have to ignore or what you have to remove, which belongs to the old, which will then bring you closer to the new. But still, in practice, implicit is this idea that until we have grown enough, we are not even ready in maturity to meet with that. There's an interesting letter of Sri Aurobindo where he says that fortunately, certain aspects of freedom for India did not happen too soon, because if it was premature, the freedom would have been lost. So these are very complex issues we come back to. His comment, I have no doubt, 1911, he's saying, we shall have to go through our parliamentary period. So he's seeing, as part of this evolution from where we are to where we have to be, a passage through the parliamentary phase. In order to get rid of the notion of Western democracy by seeing in practice how helpless it is to make nations blessed. So we've tried it. You see the mess that it has produced for the last 70, now nearly approaching 80 years. The mess that we have had to struggle through, and with no hope until, well, a few individuals who came to power, who loved the country and who had some idea of what could be done, have put in motion what I would broadly describe as positive, constructive policies for India. But if you remove those few people from the top, very likely the whole thing would collapse into the chaos of what was before. Unless someone else could take their place, who could hold that kind of vision and still have the trust of the people. So this idea that somehow if you imitate the Western democracy model, that you will have results is completely a mistake. The error comes because you saw in the West prosperity. And the prosperity was ascribed to that model of democracy and to its religion. So when the Christian priests went around converting people in the East, they said, look, it is Christianity which made Europe rich. So convert to Christianity, you'll get money. That was their entry point to get into conversions. It still continues today with the same idea of converting by economic enticement. But the reality was Europe became wealthy on its colonization of the rest of the world. From the point that it lost the colonization, it began to sink. It shifted more to colonization by monetary control, what we discussed last time with the paper printing of money. When that collapses again, there is going to be an equitable framework where you will no more have this kind of an exaggerated wealth of a few. So in practice, it was neither the democracy framework nor the religion which made Europe wealthy. And the evidence you see in China. China does not have democracy. It does not have the religion. And because it has an integrated monolithic administrative structure, quite opaque to those outside, but internally somewhat open with its own people, it is able to progress with a rapidity because the people at the top have a certain vision and fiercely protective of their national interest. So you do not need either of these. You can bypass all of these things and still have very good rapid progress. The only thing missing is the, well, freedom of interaction. But you could still explain that away and say, well, perhaps it is useful not to have that kind of freedom for a while until people are stable and mature enough. I don't know. It's a complex question. I will not touch that. But the idea he's suggesting is that you have to pass through the parliamentary period to get rid of the notion by seeing in practice that it doesn't work. Now, this is what Sri Aurobindo points to as one of the processes used in the yoga. Certain things which belong to the past or which are in structure belonging to a consciousness of the past and not a truth of the future, they rise. And in rising, you see they do not work and eventually they're expelled. And this process, when it takes place in an individual, you go through what is called a crisis. But the same thing happens in a collective, and in this particular case, on the national scale. And if it's happening for India nationally, it happens for other countries also nationally. And in principle, you could extend that to on a global scale. But global scale alignments are more complex. So it's easier to understand these things at a national level. So let's look at this again. India is passing really through the first stages of a sort of national yoga. First stages. If 1911 is first stages, we are in the thick of it now, quite obviously. And then he explains what is really happening in this national yoga. It was mastered in the inception, this transition yoga, India. It was mastered in the inception by the inrush of divine force, which came in 1905. Sri Aurobindo at that time was in the thick of politics, and it was through him that this enormous action took place, where people woke up across the country and said, oh, we demand complete freedom. So, inrush of divine force, which came in 1905 and aroused it from its state of complete tamasic ajnanam. So, this is ignorance and inertia. That was the condition before. Suddenly people woke up. That's when the Viceroy of India declared Aurobindo Ghosh, Sri Aurobindo, as the most dangerous man in India. Why? Because he was writing articles and giving speeches, which woke up people. But it was the force working through him at that point, which woke up people. And then he says, but as happens also with individuals, all that was evil, all the wrong sanskaras, tendencies, prior programmings, and wrong emotions and mental and moral habits rose with it and misused the divine force. So you take a human being, infuse into him divine force. What's the first thing which will happen? All the existing framework of his personality, including distortions and wrong tendencies, will rise and seize upon this and try to use it to their ends. Hence, all that orgy of political oratory, democratic fervor, meetings, processions, passive resistance, all ending in bombs, revolvers, and coercion laws. So you see the chaos which happens when that kind of excitation builds, and then the imposition of further laws, draconian laws, etc. It was a period of ashuddha rajasic activity, impure excitation, activity, and had to be followed by the inevitable period of tamasic reaction and disappointed rajas. So whenever you have a strong drive of passion and it fails, you have a reaction which says, oh, I give up. This is no good. No way. I'm fed up. I'm tired. I cannot do it anymore. So that's the tamasic reaction. And the disappointed rajas. The more powerful the excitation, the more intense the disappointment. It does not work. What is this? So and so failed me. This one betrayed me, and so on. So, what is the solution? What do you have to do? Of course, in such things, it's not the drive of the rajas. It has to be done with a deep, calm equality, seeing what is truth, working for it on the basis of a solid, stable, calm, clear consciousness. That would be the way. But we're talking of a group, of a collective. So, it's not an individual here. But the principle operates the same way. God has struck it all down. And he lists what are the things struck down. Moderatism, the bastard child of English liberalism. So you see, from English liberalism, you really have to appreciate English history to appreciate the nuance and the subtlety and humor involved. It's English liberalism modified and emanating from there an attempt to replicate it, and that is called the moderatism in India at that point. And the moderatism there basically was in the Congress at that time, the Congress party, which would basically appeal to the British and put petitions saying, please be petition for this, petition that, and that's the moderatism, a kind of a slavery, willing slavery of a very proud kind. I'm so great as a slave to be a good slave. Okay, so God has struck it all down, moderatism, then nationalism, the mixed progeny of Europe and Asia. Interesting. So it draws elements from Europe, elements from the Asian traditions and values, and you have what is called nationalism, at least as it was practiced then. Third, terrorism, the abortive offspring of Bakunin and Mazzini. Again, you're drawing from certain other civilizational values or symbols and building upon it, and that becomes the terrorism at that point, where there were people who wanted to blow bombs and kill the British and so on. And he will explain that. The latter still lives, but it is being slowly ground to pieces. Now, you see, from the big picture, and he's revealing to you how it is seen from the higher consciousness, from a higher plane even, I will go so far as to say from the world of the gods. When they look down at the human condition and there is this thing rising, they can see what will be the consequences, and then there are interventions. And God struck it all down. Moderatism, nationalism, terrorism. Bang. So something rises, bang. Something rises, bang. And at the same time, something builds from below to shape and mold the people. That's the vision seen from the top, and he's sharing this. The latter still lives, but it is being slowly ground to pieces. It's not a bang striking down, it's a crushing, slow crushing. At present, it is our only enemy. This is the terrorism aspect. It is our only enemy, for I do not regard the British coercion as an enemy, but as a helper. Very interesting, very profound. Think about what it means. If it can only rid us of this wild pamphleteering, these theatrical assassinations, these frenzied appeals to national hatred with their watchword, Ferengi ko maro, kill the foreigner. These childish conspiracies, these idiotic schemes for facing a modern army with a half a dozen guns and some 100 lathis, sticks. So you had these people who thought that they could make a few guns and then attack the British army and drive them away. Stupid. On the other hand, which you saw later exaggerated by Gandhi, who was not yet present at this point, that with a few sticks, you could stand before, or with non-violence, you could stand before the British. So Sri Aurobindo lists all this, idiotic schemes, and then dash, the opium visions of Rajoguna run mad. The Rajasic quality running mad, having opium dreams. You see, there's a very powerful, subtle humor, but at the same time, a dismissal of all these methods. So I come back to the sentence. If it can rid us of all this, then I say, more power to its elbow. What is it? British coercion. So he says British coercion is not the enemy. If it can get rid of all this, then I will say more power to its elbow. You have to really understand how deeply Sri Aurobindo is rooted in his understanding of things. When he can see that something the British are doing as a coercion can be actually necessary or even useful. And he can say it. He has the guts to say that. But with the clarity of what it is working for and what are its limitations. So I continue. For it is only when this foolishness is done with that truth will have a chance. The sattvic, pure, illumined, luminous mind, the sattvic mind in India emerge, and a really strong spiritual movement begin as a prelude to India's regeneration. Wow, you see the big picture. You have to have the sattvic mind emerging, a strong spiritual movement beginning, and after that will be India's regeneration. You look at his perspective. Of course, in practice, things tend to blend. The end of all this stupidity, which was exaggerated further by Gandhi with his different form of the same stupidity, idiotic schemes and theatrical frenzied demonstrations and so on. But all that blended into a free India, and the spiritual awakening and the sattvic mind still did not fully emerge. At best, we can say it is beginning to happen now. And at the same time, there's no spiritual movement in the politics, but there is a base for it being laid by people turning more and more to look for deeper knowledge in the roots of the civilization. That's where we are at. But you see the trend line from here. No doubt there will be plenty of trouble and error still to face, but we shall have a chance of putting our feet on the right path. In all, I believe God to be guiding us, giving the necessary experiences, preparing the necessary conditions. So God is guiding, God is giving the necessary experiences, and God is preparing the necessary conditions for that awakening to take place later. Now, in practice, Sri Aurobindo had expected some of this to happen when India became free. Very quickly, he saw that we were nowhere close to that because of whatever distortions had come in and even the division, partition of India, which took place at that point. The last attempt was 1941-42, and Sri Aurobindo had initiated the Cripps mission as a way for preventing this partition. But after partition, certain things were enormously delayed. That's when, of course, he took the decision also to leave his body and accelerate the process of the sadhana through that shift in position. But here you get the big picture of the development of the national yoga. If you look at it from this perspective and look at perhaps all large countries' civilizational units as passing through an equivalent national yoga, and then look at the whole of humanity from this lens, a lot of things become understandable and clear. So I'm going to read another text of Sri Aurobindo where I skip the bulk of the content, but in a few short selections, I will read. This is written to Biren. Sri Aurobindo writes, your list of questions is rather a long one. I'll answer you in the mass rather than in detail. And chiefly, I will attack two fallacies with which your letter teems, if I may use such an expression, and which lie at the root of your very disfavorable attitude. First, he says, there are two Hinduisms. One which takes its stand on the kitchen and seeks its paradise by cleaning the body. Humorous take for something very superficial. And one which takes, and another which seeks God not through the cooking pot and social convention, but in the soul. So you have the Hinduism of the kitchen, which you can understand how that works. Even today, spirituality of the kitchen, where you sit around, have social gossip, have food together, have a good time, and maybe a little prayer, singing, and so on. And you say that's your spirituality. It's taken an interesting form, just in passing as an aside, which I find fascinating as a step towards something higher, where earlier many of the young people were attracted to having drugs and alcohol in pubs and equivalent as a replica imitation of the West. It has suddenly shifted, and what they're doing instead, they're having these gala parties, which are very much like what you see in India's big weddings. But where now, instead of alcohol, they serve non-alcoholic drinks, and where instead of having loud, noisy music, they have some kind of bhajans, kirtans, spiritual, devotional, and religious songs, but in a party spirit. Now, this is good. It's a major shift from a lower vital to a higher vital, preparing the vital for a opening to a spiritual. So already as a step, it's one of those forms which is specific to India and easy for India to have. So if you're looking for new forms, this is one such. But you can see it's still an intermediate form. And it's still very close to the Hinduism of the kitchen. So the latter is also Hinduism, but it is a good deal older and more enduring than the other. It is the Hinduism of Bhishma and Sri Krishna, of Shankara and Chaitanya, the Hinduism which exceeds Hindustan, well, the region of India, was from old and will be forever because it grows eternally through the aeons. I skip what is distinctive about this. He gives indications of what is distinctive. It's quite detailed. And then he says, among the temporary laws, the cooking pot and the lustration had their place, but they are not for all nor forever. It was in a time of calamity, of contraction under external pressure, that Hinduism fled from the inner temple and hid itself in the kitchen. So that's going back through the last, let's say, 1,000 years. Then he says, the higher and truer Hinduism is also of two kinds, sectarian and unsectarian, disruptive and synthetic. That which binds itself up in the aspect and which seeks the all, and that which seeks the all. The first is born of rajasic or tamasic attachment to an idea, an experience, an opinion, a temperament, an attitude, a particular guru, a chosen avatar. The attachment is intolerant, arrogant, proud of little knowledge, scornful of knowledge that is not its own. My guru is the only guru. My temperament is the right temperament. My avatar is the real God, etc. I don't read the whole thing. But from here, when the soul rises higher, it follows by preference its own ideas, experiences, opinions, temperament, guru, ishta, desired or familiar aspect of the divine. But it does not turn an ignorant and exclusive eye upon others. There are many paths, it cries, and all lead equally to God. All men, even the sinner and the atheist, are my brothers, and brothers in sadhana. And the beloved is drawing them each in his own way to the one without a second. So, of this higher path, he says, but when the full knowledge dawns, I embrace all experiences in myself. I know all ideas to be true, all opinions useful, all experiences and attitudes, means and stages in the acquisition of universal experience and completeness. All gurus, imperfect channels or incarnations of the one and only teacher, all ishtas and avatars to be God himself. So this is the higher eventual path to which things go. Again, he elaborates on this. I skip. Now, the last portion of this letter, which is where again the word national yoga comes. The soul of Hinduism languishes in an unfit body. Break the mold that the soul may live. Is it not the first teaching of yoga to destroy the dehatmak buddhi, the blindness that identifies the soul with its temporary body? So the first thing you do in the yoga, you realize I am not just this body, I'm not just this narrow vehicle. You break free from that false and limiting identification. And if necessary, if the mold is too rigid, even you break the mold. So then he comments, if the body were young, adaptable, fit, the liberated soul might use it, but it is decrepit. And he's speaking of the body, national body, civilizational body as it survives. But it is decrepit, full of ill health and impurity. It must be changed, not by the spirit of Western iconoclasm, which destroys the soul with the body, but by national yoga. So here you see both. You saw the Western iconoclasm, which also you see in India, destroying the soul with the body. A lot of this comes with the leftist ideology and other forms, some of the even religious forms, which are iconoclastic, but by national yoga, which means in this case, you start making a change. And a national yoga in this case means also you rebuild external systems to be commensurate to your consciousness. Now, this is a very complex process because the nation is not a one narrow monotone. It is multi-layered and multifaceted. So the change is very rapid and complex. One good sign that this is happening is that across the country, I'm talking of India now, but principally you could apply this to the United States or Europe as a whole, or Russia, China, or any other large-bodied, multifaceted. When you see across this many different attempts in many different directions and variations, each attempting to find its own form and way of realizing a deeper truth. But the common feature is an attempt to find a deeper civilizational value, truth, or spiritual ideal. If this you see happening, then it's a good sign. That means the civilizational vitality is active and the changes will take place and are inevitable. Where you find a monotone across, then that is a phase of inertia. When you find the excitations which he describes earlier, the Rajasic types, then you see it is a transition through a chaotic period to rise to something higher. So this is the idea. You have an idea from this of what is meant by national yoga. In Sri Aurobindo's writings on the secret of the Veda, he again uses that phrase, using a particular phrasing of the Veda itself to suggest that it describes a collective yoga on a human scale, not just on the national yoga. And the idea that all human beings are your kindreds in this collective evolution, spiritual evolution. So I come back now to key elements of this national yoga and its transition. And one of the key elements was, as in the yoga, you are giving a certain initiation, a certain force, a certain spiritual power which sustains you by the aid of the divine. It sustains you through the transition in the yoga itself. And generally, it is given in the form of an experience directly or as a power of experience embedded in a certain keyword or a mantra sometimes. So for India, we find Sri Aurobindo mentions this in a different way, and it is in his writings from 1907 when he was writing in the Vande Mataram. He is writing about Bankim Chandra, who is he says, the rishi of the mantra that is Vande Mataram. And I'll just quickly indicate the historical context of this. The entire freedom struggle of India, for those who may not know, the entire freedom struggle was sustained by this one phrase, Vande Mataram, victory to the Divine Mother. And Mataram is mother, but mother at the same time as Mother India as well as Divine Mother. And it gave people the strength to even lose their lives, to die in the attempt, or to suffer severe torture, to suffer dismemberment of their bodies, even under extreme torture, just with that power of that word. And the way it seized on the people is also quite amazing. And Sri Aurobindo points to this. The original vehicle through which this mantra was given to India was Bankim Chandra, Rishi Bankim Chandra. When he wrote that first, at that point, people did not recognize what it meant, but he himself said that in 30 years, people will appreciate. And Sri Aurobindo comments, actually, it was, in fact, when Sri Aurobindo writes about it, it's 32 years since that mantra was given. And he explains the rationale of what was sent or brought in through Rishi Bankim Chandra. First thing he points is that the approach which was already existent at that point to fight for India's freedom was still very much a passive approach. And from there, to wake up to a more active and dynamic approach was his first contribution. And a lot of this he did from the writings and some of his plays. So in the play, you see this passive versus the active approach, and people watching the play are as if inspired to shift mode from the passive to the active. So it's an interesting example Sri Aurobindo gives of how even plays and literature can be a preparatory or a mechanism for awakening a people and an assistance in their sadhana. I'm going to generalize this from this discussion to cinema as a whole, because today that's the vehicle of the play, of the theater, more than the theater itself. And you see in cinema, you start with certain assumptions, you end with something which transcends those assumptions. And the transition from that to this is the high that you have at the end of the cinema, if it is meant to give you a high. Sometimes they're meant to be a low, but we'll leave aside those. But almost every cinema becomes popular when there is a high that you're led to in the transition. And if that is skillfully done, you catch a people at the point where they are to lift them, or where they are ready to lift, and lift them exactly to what they are ready for. That becomes a great hit. 20 years later, you look back at the same cinema and you wonder, why was it such a big hit? Well, you have to understand the context of that period. So there are many such transition points, but we come back to Rishi Bankim Chandra and his articles. So first thing he did was to make this shift. He bade us leave the canine method of agitation for the leonine, from the dog mode to the lion mode. And the mother of his vision held trenchant steel in her twice 70 million hands, and not the bowl of the mendicant. Where earlier people went with the begging bowl, he was setting the pace for this transition. Fearless strength and force, which it was the gospel of fearless strength and force, which he preached under a veil and in images in Anandamat and Devi Chaudhurani. These were the plays. And he had an inspired, unerring vision of the moral strength which must be at the back of the outer force. The second thing which Sri Aurobindo points to, it's a long passage, so I'm skipping portions. The second thing which Sri Aurobindo points to as his contribution is that he elaborated on the self-discipline and organization necessary for this awakening. And you see this in his plays again. And I don't read the full text, but I think what we read will give you an idea. But the importance of organization and collective organization. You will recall the mother's observation for India particularly, that after the phase of downfall because of the ascetic phase of its spirituality, India lost two things. One was the grip on matter, because for too long, nearly 2000 years, we would say, the world was discarded as illusion. And you have lost the grip at a civilizational level, and to regain that grip, well, it takes time. So in a sense, India is relearning this from contact with the West. But it's happening fast because intrinsically the civilization had it before and really had mastered it at one point. So the lost grip comes back perhaps in a couple of generations. The second thing she says, which India lacks, was the collective discipline. So collective discipline and respect for matter. These were the two key phrases which she said necessary for the future. And so we see this also as the second contribution. And the form it took was a religious patriotism. So this is the second great service of Bankim to his country, that he pointed out to it the way of salvation and gave it the religion of patriotism. And the third and supreme service of Bankim to his nation was that he gave us the vision of our mother. Now, this is what I'm going to focus on a little bit. Sri Aurobindo explains that if you simply focus on an idea, motherland, oh, this is your motherland. Okay, because why? Oh, you're getting the food from the land. Your ancestors lived on the land. Oh, this is the area which is yours. It's not enough. It does not connect you more deeply. It does not have a spiritual content. And without a spiritual content, it does not have lasting value. It would not be enough for you to sacrifice even yourself to protect that, because what are you protecting? I can just as well go across the hill, across the mountain, across the ocean to another land and make it my own. What does it matter? Eventually, my descendants will call it the land of their ancestors. What binds you to this? Nothing, isn't it? So there is a deeper dimension which you have to awaken to realize what this is all about. And this is what he's referring to here. The bare intellectual idea of the motherland is not in itself a great driving force. The mere recognition of the desirability of freedom is not an inspiring motive. If you just tell people, hey, it'll be nice to be free of colonization, isn't it? It's not enough. So then he explains that this abstraction of the freedom as an idea is not enough, and it doesn't really work. I'm skipping lines. It is not till the motherland reveals herself to the eye of the mind as something more than a stretch of earth or a mass of individuals. It is not till she takes shape as a great divine and maternal power in a form of beauty that can dominate the mind and seize the heart that these petty fears and hopes vanish in the all-absorbing passion for the mother and her service. And the patriotism that works miracles and saves a doomed nation is born. So you see how important it was for this conception to be awakened in the people as a living experience that touches the mind and seizes the heart. At that point, you will say India is ready to be led through a freedom struggle and to gain the freedom and to be worthy of the freedom. The third is very important. That we'll elaborate upon later. But if you don't have this base, you can't even start a freedom struggle. So Rishi Bankim Chandra has, so to say, laid that vision or made that available. And Sri Aurobindo then builds upon that and infuses into it a real vitality and a practical form for the freedom struggle. So we're coming back to Sri Aurobindo's text. To some men, To some men, it is given to have the vision and to reveal it to others. It was 32 years ago that Bankim wrote his great song, and few listened. But in a sudden moment of awakening from long delusions, the people of Bengal looked around for the truth. And in a fated moment, somebody sang Bande Mataram. The mantra had been given, and in a single day, a whole people had been converted to the religion of patriotism. A people, the mass. Just one day. That incident, actually, if I may be permitted to digress in the middle of the text, we will reread the text. I will read from this, which was sent to me just earlier today. It's the incident which actually woke up people to Bande Mataram, and it shows. Okay. This is from Evening Talks of Purani. So the incident is narrated. They did not expect a Bengali to be so strong. Once at Howrah station, a Bengali was being bullied by an Englishman. Suddenly he shouted, Bande Mataram! And everyone in the train began to shout, and the Englishman took alarm. That was the sudden transformation during the Swadeshi days. Before that, our people used to tremble before an Englishman. The position was even reversed. This is the example of that transition. Suddenly, someone shouts Vande Mataram, and it seizes the mind and heart. But you see, this is the external form of it. Before that, all the inspiring texts of Ananda Math with the Vande Mataram song within it is built in the collective over a whole, let's say, a whole generation, 30 years, a little more than a generation. And when it has sufficiently steeped in, then you need the match which lights it. So one trigger. So you can't say, oh, that man shouted, therefore it happened. It's the build-up over 30 years, which then allowed one man's, and it didn't matter who it was, who lit the match. Everyone catches it. So the mantra had been given, and in a single day, a whole people had been converted to the religion of patriotism. See, it's a religion of patriotism, not a sectarian religion. It includes everyone. And patriotism, you see, and the principle, it's not just about India and Mother India. It's Mother India in this context is incarnation of Divine Mother, so it's actually Mother of the world. And when you see it like that, you include all humanity in your patriotism. So, in a single day, a whole people had been converted to the religion of patriotism. The mother had revealed herself. Once the vision has come to a people, once that vision has come to a people, there can be no rest, no peace, no farther slumber till the temple has been made ready, the image installed, and the sacrifice offered. Very deep symbolic, and the whole sadhana is encapsulated. And then he says, a great nation which has had that vision can never again bend its neck in subjection to the yoke of a conqueror. Very powerful stuff. One of the implications is that India can never again be colonized. Any attempt to colonize, even indirectly, let's say through social media or economic or other means, well, having been through that phase at a civilizational level, even though the memory is no more evident in the people, having been through that, there will be a civilizational pushback at some stage, which is what you are seeing in other places, but not drawn by such a vision. So when China is pushing back, it's not the people rising to push back. It's an elite of the Communist Party that controls the nation, which says, hey, if we allow that, we will lose our control. So there is a pushback and an organized pushback. It's very different from this, where the mother had revealed herself. And with that vision, you cannot rest until what happens? No rest, no slumber, till the temple has been made ready, the image installed, and the sacrifice offered. What is this temple? What is the image and the sacrifice? So you go back to the wording of Bande Mataram, the song itself, which inspired people, the mantra, which is the song. Sri Aurobindo explains elsewhere that the body of the song, Vande Mataram, and I'm elaborating on this because it's also the 150th anniversary of the first printing of the song. He says there are three phases in the wording. In the first phase, the lands are described, the physical form of the mother as the mountains, the rivers, and so on. In the second phase, the force, the spirit, the energy, the vitality is described. And in the third, the spiritual being that is Mother India as the Divine Mother is described. So there's a structure to it in the revelation of the vision itself, going from outer form through something deeper, which empowers you, to something which inspires you by the spiritual truth, which is then a lasting truth. And because it is a spiritual and lasting truth, not bound to specific form of time and space, it can be eternally an inspiration and can remodel external forms freely, even abandoning, if necessary, entirely forms, or rebuilding from complete crush or destruction, because it is an eternal inspiration. That's why this is so important. So when you have this vision, you cannot rest until the image is installed, until the temple is made ready, image installed. So we come to the text now. In this particular part of the text, he describes how, addressed to the Mother India and the Divine Mother, he says, the Rishi says, Bahute tumi ma Shakti, in my arms you are the strength. Hridaya tumi ma Bhakti, in my heart you are the devotion and the love for the Mother. In my mind, in my head, you are the knowledge and the intelligence. So all the three things that you need, the physical vital strength, the love, devotion, and then the knowledge, the wisdom, the intellect to guide the whole process, all these are hers in you. And then it says, Tumari Pratima Gauri Mandire Mandire, your image established, Mother, in temple and temple. Now, the mandir here, even the word mandir, if you go to the etymology, suggests the vehicle, the human vehicle itself. And the external temple is a symbol of the human being and the levels of consciousness and the journey of consciousness. So when it says your image installed in temple and temple, literally it means in every human heart. And so you cannot rest until the temple has been made ready. That's you as a vehicle. The image installed, where now you feel the Divine Mother within you as the living presence, as the living force that inspires you, that sustains and drives you and acts through you, and you become her instrument, her vehicle for action in the world. And that's the sacrifice offered, where you are entirely, consciously an instrument of the divine will, in a complete dissolution of your narrow egoism to the identification with the divine will, which is yourself in your origin. So the process of the yoga is implicit in this. Build the temple, purify it necessarily. So build it includes make your body strong, make your life energy strong, make your intelligence strong, and all the things which you would normally associate with the external life and external success. And then, of course, but you're doing it for this, so that you may install the image and be a worthwhile instrument. And then you install the image, the living image of the Divine Mother in you, and completely offer yourself to become her instrument. That's the sacrifice offered. And so a great nation which has had that vision can never again bend its neck in subjection to the yoke of a conqueror. And this is now entrenched in the collective consciousness. The unfoldment of what is entrenched will still take time. So we can say it began, Sri Aurobindo says, 32 years after that publication. So 1907, Sri Aurobindo says this has already been revealed. But the unfoldment of that has gone through a very difficult passage. And one of the passages which I've mentioned before with some distress to many is when this song, this mantra was discarded in favor of a different song, instead of this becoming the national anthem. And Sri Aurobindo makes a comment at that point when there was a controversy because the word Durga is used, Mother India, you are Durga. You are this, you are that. So various deities of the divine, aspects of the divine, are you implicit. So there were some Muslims who wanted partition, who declared this is not acceptable to us. They started boycotting and creating trouble. So there was a compromise. This was made a national song. National anthem was something else. But the basis of this, remember, was partition, where partition was held on the basis that, and that was the claim, at least on the Islamic side, that Islam is a separate religion and therefore has to be a separate nation. So Pakistan is the pure land. Hindustan is the land of the infidels. And the split is made on the basis of that. It's no more India, it's no more Bharat, it's Pakistan and Hindustan. And the infidel land is, well, not pure, impure. So if you have already accepted that falsehood, then you should not have compromised on this point either. But this is all, of course, not in our hands. It was the leaders at that point. You see, it was symbolic. The fact that this truth of the vision of the mother could not be fully accepted by a group, that was the basis also of partition. So practically what they did was they cut Vande Mataram, removed all this portion, which is precisely the spiritual content of it, and kept only the external appearance. Oh, the land, rivers, and so beautiful land. And obviously with that was lost the power of this revelation. So what you found is after partition, India becomes independent, but loses the spiritual inspiration and falls again. And again, you can treat this as part of the national yoga, where having had a great vision, the machinery, the vehicle, the instrument, especially in its lower parts, is incapable of sustaining. And so you fall from that great vision. In the fall, something of the higher is integrated into the lower. And again, you start living by the old habits, except it no more satisfies because you've had a higher vision. So now you start looking for something else to fill the dissatisfaction, and you start, again, as part of the national yoga, copy this, copy that, attempt this, attempt the other, and you go through all the drama, including what Sri Aurobindo pointed to as the parliamentary democracy model, which is doomed to failure, and maybe other experiments of various kinds, including everything we see today, which is a mere imitation or adaptation at best, as an improvement from a mere imitation. But it needs to be rebuilt fundamentally from a new consciousness that comes from this vision. So in this attempt of the national yoga, you start trying this, trying that, until eventually the entire vehicle, the mind of the people, is ready for something higher. When that happens, again, perhaps a seed, a match, a voice, Bande Mataram, or some other form in which the vision is again woken up in the community, in the collectivity, and there is this awakening that takes place, now more complete, more ready, better integrated, and perhaps ready for an actual, more successful articulation of that vision in national life. So I am placing this as the vision, hopefully, for what is currently in process of building and which might still happen. The fact that the present government actually took pains to celebrate the 150th anniversary of Vande Mataram is, to me, a great sign. Somehow it has been awakened in the national consciousness, and so I took the occasion for this elaboration on this theme as part of our current affairs, because without this you cannot understand what is happening in India or where it's going, and you might even tend to lose hope. So my intention here is to bring back that hope and give the big picture that Sri Aurobindo has shared of a national yoga. Once you understand this here, you will also be able to see equivalent processes in other large countries. In the United States particularly, an enormous churning is taking place. It's, as a people, it is much more simplistic, much less diverse compared to India. And the positions also of the various elements are relatively less complex. India is much more rich and complex to be able to understand fully. But what you will see everywhere else will be a subset of the complexity of India. So if you understand the full picture within India, you can much more easily appreciate what happens elsewhere. And which is also the reason why India is, so to say, the prototype for human awakening. If it can be completed in this space, then its consequence in the rest of humanity is inevitable. This was the point the mother made, that in a sense, India is a concentration of all the world's problems. And here they can be resolved on the basis of a greater spiritual potential. I will end with a very practical transition point that we are at today, which I'll link it to what we spoke earlier about the economic transition. All these statements that what I mentioned today is some statement that you will have so many millions, I think they said 20 million, who will be jobless within the next 2 years because AI will replace them. It comes to something very important, and this is key, one of the crucial triggers we have to recognize for this awakening. What is AI doing? AI is able to replace most human behavior, most surface, superficial human intelligence currently, and very likely will exceed within a year or two even that. So what happens to the people who are being replaced? Either you say, well, my AI can read the entire encyclopedia in 1 second and replicate, even come to logical conclusions based on that and pass any exam and any job that I would do. So either I say, fine, let AI replace me and I become its slave, it will do my job, or I will exceed it. I will do what it cannot do. You cannot stay the same. You are eliminated. You are superfluous. You either fall or you rise. This is the challenge for humanity. I'm putting it in the Indian context, especially now. If you have to rise, what does that mean? You will have to go above mere logical reason, above mere ability to handle and manipulate data, because that it can do far better and faster than you. What does that mean? A shift in consciousness above the intellect. And if you look at the earth as a whole, which parts of earth do you think are ready for that kind of shift or more ready for that kind of a shift because of civilizational background? The one large portion that stands out is India. Precisely because of that spiritual base and the work done in the past for that higher conscious building of the intuition in every field. In every field, the attempt was literally to push the boundaries beyond mere human mastery to an intuitive mastery and opening to the spiritual through all sciences, music, arts, dances, skills of all kinds, including administrative. If that has been done for a few thousand years already, and even though much of that is lost currently in the declining phase of the civilization, in the attempt to rise up, there's a familiarity in the civilizational context. No other country has this today, at least not as a living force of experience. So when this challenge is to be faced in humanity, the attempt to go beyond and not become superfluous because of AI, the attempt to go beyond into a new level of consciousness, there is much greater likelihood of it succeeding in India, whereas elsewhere, a much greater likelihood of things falling down, going below, or needing then intensely to draw upon the knowledge of yoga from India. And this is where you see the inevitability of one of the 5 dreams of Sri Aurobindo, which is India's gift of knowledge, spiritual knowledge to the world. But for that, she must realize it herself, put it into practice in collective life, in community life, not just individual life. So what is being done in individual life already at a very base, crude level, ideas of yoga have spread across the world. But in its collective implementation, how can that be? Well, that is to be seen. And for that, we are at that crucial juncture where the external spark of technology will kickstart this process of awakening. Sri Aurobindo even makes this observation: if the truth has to manifest, India is the most fertile ground because of this background. But if it cannot, well, it can go elsewhere and try elsewhere. So that also will happen. There will be individuals, there will be communities across the world who are spiritually sufficiently open and ready, where perhaps the truth will be even established earlier than you might see it in the whole of India. But within India also, you'll have similar patches. So we are at a very interesting transition point. The next 2 years, if I may say, as representing the transition kick-started by AI replacing human beings, will force this shift. It'll force questioning of why do you educate your children and for what? Why do you take up a job and for what? All these are going to be stark in the question they will demand an answer from you for. And you'll have to face it. You cannot say, oh, I'll think about it when I retire. You have to face now, otherwise you sink. How many will accept to sink? How many will make the effort to rise? That is to be seen. So this will be, this is another factor of the national yoga in the Indian context. Again, I'm generalizing to other spaces where you will have units. There are many such units. And when my teacher, MP Pandit, went to the United States, it was not so strong in Europe, but in the United States, he found many such spiritual communities and pockets. Not all of them have survived, not all of them have maintained their purity, but those which have, you can see, have something of the higher truth which has been caught by them, and which is why they still have this youth of higher vision. And well, there are individuals and collectives in which these things would form, and in Europe perhaps. So this is the national yoga that I wanted to share the vision of with you for today. I'm going to quickly go through chat box. I won't take up things which would digress too much, because this is an important theme I want to you to pause on. So Revati is saying, why does Sri Aurobindo invoke Mother Durga for the Aryan children, Indians? Why specifically that aspect of the Divine Mother? Durga is the aspect of the Divine Mother in which, if you see the original narrative, all the deities pour their energies to form her. So she is, in a sense, a combination of all the powers necessary for that particular crisis for which she was, so to say, emanated from the divine. In a separate letter, Sri Aurobindo highlights Durga as a blend of Maheshwari and Mahakali aspects, particularly knowledge and power aspects. So when you look at a civilization that is fallen into inertia, you need the power aspect and you need the knowledge aspect. It is the combination of these two particularly which are essential for the awakening of a civilization, of a people. So the name, because of this combination, would be most likely that would be the form, the aspect called upon. But generally, if you look at even Durga as the entry point for the Divine Mother, who includes all these and much more, from a yoga point of view, that is a superior conception. Even if you use the word Durga, conceive of her as not merely that traditional form or aspect, but go beyond that to the vehicle or the form through which you approach the Divine Mother herself in her totality, in her cosmic multifacetedness, with all her powers. That is a superior stance from the yoga point of view. I think this would be a good point to pause upon. Once again, I will summarize key points. India is going through a national yoga. Many things which need to be eliminated will rise up as part of the recrudescence of things buried to be worked out or to be thrown out or to be reshaped, reformed, recast. Similar processes across other great cultural spaces or human units. And I'm looking at broad sections, not just small units. Perhaps there are other countries also which have specific passages, but it's more useful for these things to see big picture. As part of this, there is a preparatory phase, there are trigger points, and then there are transition points which are compelled. Recall the mother's comment, the future will crush them with its irresistible power. Now you understand how that can happen. So there will be that also. And in the midst of such rapid transitions, you will see uncertainties. Do not be afraid. That's when, rather than saying, what will happen to me, you say, this is the opportunity for me to align myself as completely as possible to the divine power that is working through these uncertainties to awaken humanity. And so, in order to fulfill that, you must rise from your slumber. I'm reading from Sri Aurobindo. Till the temple has been made ready, the image installed, and the sacrifice offered. And this is the individual yoga that all of us commit to as part of this national and human collective yoga of humanity. Let's meditate on this theme for a few moments in a collective aspiration. Remember, always the Divine Mother is helping and guiding. So call on her, rely upon her, lean on her for strength, for wisdom, and for action. She will never fail you. Namaste.